Good afternoon. This is Elizabeth. It is just about 3 o'clock, and I see some folks are still coming into the webinar room, so I'll just touch base about a few housekeeping items before we dive into our session this afternoon. So we will record this session and we'll post it on the Plan4Health website. And this Ask the Expert opportunity is really connected to the CDC online course that you'll hear a little bit more about in the introduction, but I wanted to go ahead and put the summary on the screen for you. And those of you who are attending the Plan4Health Sacramento Regional Meeting coming up in just less than 2 weeks, we'll have the chance to continue this conversation face-to-face with our CDC Division of Community Health experts. And for those of you who are not joining us in Sacramento, we will make some time later in August or maybe September to have a virtual one-to-one conversation and take advantage of the DCH expertise there as well. So this afternoon is really meant to be an open conversation, and we have a few folks on the line, but you're welcome to unmute your line and just dive in and ask questions as we go along. You're also welcome to use the chat feature right there on the right-hand side of your screen. So today we are welcoming Jessica Polasky and Melissa Talbot from the Division of Community Health, and they will be talking a little bit about the online course that you've probably all had a chance to check out, at least to start. I finished it myself the other day. It took me a little longer than I thought. I stopped and started a couple of times, but I found it to be a really helpful tool, and nothing like those interactive exercises to force you to really think about the audiences in your elevator speech. So I have some questions of my own that I want to ask this team, and really you're welcome to ask anything that's on your mind. Just to make sure we're all on the same page and kind of have a shared understanding of the course and some of the basics, Jessica and Melissa are going to give a brief intro and remind everyone of the key topics, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So I will go ahead and hand things over to you, Jessica and Melissa.
Great. Thanks so much, Elizabeth, and hello, everyone. Jessica Polasky here from the DCH Communications team. And as Elizabeth mentioned, before we move into Q&A, Melissa and I wanted to take a few moments to recap several key points from the spokesperson training you all took this summer. So sometimes when we hear the word spokesperson, we automatically think of a person on TV who's representing a company or organization. The reality is that everyone's a spokesperson. So anytime you're talking about your program, meeting with stakeholders, or giving a presentation, you're the spokesperson. And so therefore, we should be able to effectively talk about what we do and why it matters. And we need to be strategic in how we talk about our programs. So we can do that by identifying our audiences and developing messages that resonate with them while still advancing our work. So a few other points. While your message may remain consistent, just keep in mind that different kinds of media opportunities mean that you can deliver your message in different ways. So, for example, like a short 30-second soundbite for local news is quite different from an in-depth 30-minute interview on local talk radio. But regardless of the media opportunity, your audience will want to hear proof that your issue and your solutions are important and worthy of their attention. So proof can come in the form of stories, data, examples, statistics. One thing that the online spokesperson training talked about are the 4 B's of being a spokesperson, and I'll just run through those briefly. So be prepared. This means practice, get ready with talking points and messages ahead of time, and prep for tough questions. And Melissa will go into a few techniques you can use to handle tough questions. Be quotable, so people will remember something quick, clear, and focused. Be an educator. So media interviews may be our greatest opportunity as a spokesperson because we know from research that many audiences don't know about our program. So this is our opportunity to share them. And finally, be in control. And it's the whole, quote unquote, stay on message statement. So as best as possible, keep your nerves under control, and the techniques that Melissa will jump into now are, again, ways that you can handle tough questions. So with that, Melissa, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jessica. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty of message delivery tips. And again, this is a recap from what you should have already heard. But a very smart rule of thumb is to begin and end with your most important message. You want it to be the first thing that people hear and then the last thing that they take away after an interview. And you also want to repeat your message when you can, making sure you're not saying the same thing over and over with the exact same phrasing, but that idea, that message, that key point that you want heard gets said whenever it's possible and appropriate. And so some ways to keep on message and to handle those tough questions like Jessica referenced earlier, there are some techniques to remember for that. There are bridging, headlining, and hooking as three of the ones that we do. Bridging is a way to bring the discussion back to your message if needed. Headlining and hooking are both audible cues that will get your audience to listen more closely to what you're going to say next. So I'll walk briefly through these three. Bridging. Again, bridging is a way to acknowledge that the question's been asked and steer the conversation back to your key message. In general, we have this social construct, this idea that when you're asked a question, you answer it. For example, someone goes, "Hey, what's your name?" I go, "Melissa." But in a meeting or presentation, you don't always have to answer every question that you're asked, especially if they're really off topic. So an example of bridging might be, if someone doesn't like smoke and their neighbors are in the apartment below are smokers, shouldn't they just move? A good answer would be to use the phrase, "Another way to look at this is," and then move back to your key message. So, for example, another way to look at this is that everyone has the right to live free from harmful secondhand smoke. Many people, especially families, the elderly, and those who are low income, don't have a lot of options for where to live. So again, you don't want to repeat what they've just said. You want to frame it differently. So headlining. Sometimes people also call this highlighting, but either way, it sets up your answer with a listen up phrase. These phrases, again, are audible cues for your audience that something important is coming up next. So an example of this might be, if you had the question, what do you say to people who think funding for anti-smoking policies is a misuse of dollars that could be better spent in other ways? You could start your answer with, the key is that prevention is a great investment, and then carry on. For every dollar we spend on prevention, we see a 5-to-1 return on investment in just 5 years. Now here, that key phrase, the key is, turns a negative implication into a positive message, so it helps switch it there. And then hooking. Hooking is a way to share more information than was asked by hooking a series of related points together. For example, you're calling for workplace wellness programs, but is there any real value to them for businesses? Answer, to answer your question first, our partnering companies, go on, second, and then third. By saying first, it makes them think that it lets the listeners and readers and whoever else know that you've got other information coming later. So hooking allows us to offer a succinct list of positive attributes and get your points across. So again, in summary, bridging, headlining, and hooking are ways to focus on your key messages and also maintain control over the interview if you get some difficult questions or just aren't sure where it's going. Jessica?
Thanks, Melissa. So again, just to recap, these techniques combined with the 4 Bs and just recognizing the important role that everyone plays in being a spokesperson for an organization are helpful things to keep in mind for your next media opportunity, meeting with partners, or engagement with stakeholders. So on that note, I'll turn it over to you, Elizabeth, to start the Q&A.
Sure. Thank you, Jessica and Melissa. That was great. And I think that's such an important point that you make, Jessica, around the role of spokesperson is in fact a role that everyone plays all of the time, and even in partner meetings or with folks who may be a little bit more familiar with our work, there's still an opportunity to hit on the 4 Bs. I have to say I have the hardest time with being quotable. I get a little carried away with the details of a project, and especially projects like ours, which are, as you all know, very complex, and we're grappling with all of these issues and variables, and I always have that impulse to just explain everything in detail instead of kind of stepping back and focusing on those key messages or really signaling very clearly, this is important, this is why we're here. So it's definitely homework for me to do before getting to Sacramento. And I liked the idea of the educator as one of the Bs and really using the opportunity to just provide general information, I think, about our type of work. And certainly within Plan4Health, and my impression is all of the Division of Community Health work, communication is a really big component. And I guess I'd be interested if you could maybe talk a little bit more about just the overall importance of communication, this type of initiative, or in public health programmings in general, and I think education is certainly a big piece. But could you share a little bit more about why the CDC is really invested in this type of work?
Absolutely. So, communications is a way to tell your story, right? And to tell your story broadly through outlets that reach a variety of audiences. It can generate inspired community conversations, and it can soften the ground for these conversations. And it's a way to show your community how to make healthy living easier. So it's a tool, it's connected to your programmatic work, it's in support of your programmatic work, but it's a way to reach a variety of people and to make them understand why your work is important and why they should care about it. And Melissa, did you have anything else to add there?
I would say that the Division of Community Health defines communication broadly. So it's more than just public service announcements or brochures or presentations. It's all the ways that you message out to your audiences, your partners, each other. So communication really does support programmatic work and pretty much anything you do. It's an amplifier, if nothing else. And so the value out of having a strategic and effective communication plan or idea goes really, really far.
I like that as an amplifier. I think that's a great way to describe it. I think what we've experienced on the national level, getting more involved in using social media, and it's been definitely a learning experience for me to add hashtag Plan4Health to everything. And I think you bring up a good point about being intentional in terms of communications and thinking about it as complementing your program strategies and being a strategy in itself, which is so true, and again, something that I've learned working on this particular project in a way that I did not appreciate beforehand. But I wondered if you could talk a little bit, when we're kind of thinking about the communications universe and, spokesperson kind of skills, that's in one space, and then we have, for example, on Plan4Health, we've got our blog, and we have our Twitter account, and we try to have some events when we have them at the national office to make any sort of connections we can. And I just wondered if you could kind of talk through how all of these pieces fit together, or how this type of spokesperson strategy kind of complements maybe some other work that folks are doing.
Well, I think a big part of it is getting everybody on the same page. So you don't need to be saying the exact same thing over and over, but you want those key messages and key points to be, again, kind of amplified across what you're doing. And especially in organizations and coalitions where you're working with a number of different people, one key message or one aspect of your work might be better told by a certain messenger to a certain audience, and another one might be for another one. So that's where that word complementary really comes up, Elizabeth, and I'm glad you used that, because that's the main thing, is for everything to be tied together. And so people and audiences hear these positive stories and understand the value and the need of the program work that you're doing wherever they go, and they're hearing it from different people who they trust, and it kind of becomes a surround sound of support and energizing and getting people excited about the work that they're doing and understanding better the need for the work that's going on at the local level. So I think that each channel, social media, print, conversations, those types of things all have a role, and knowing your audience and how they're going to react best to that is it's all ingredients in the same kind of communication soup, and it's all delicious. But Jessica, do you want to add to that?
That's great. Yeah, so you might hear us call this like a media mix, right? And it's great to have a media mix, a variety of communications channels to get your messages out for all the reasons that Melissa said. And just another one to add is that, different people consume their information in different ways. And so some people might watch the local TV news right at 6 o'clock, and others don't even have a TV in their house, but really get their information from social media. And so by using a variety of communication channels, but really sticking to similar messages, you'll be able to reach, a broad swath of people.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense, and I think sometimes we need permission, or maybe I just need permission to recognize that I'm not the right spokesperson for every single aspect of the project. I don't necessarily have expertise in food hub work, and so figuring out where I fit and where my kind of energy and experience might be a good messenger to a particular audience versus another colleague. And I think that makes sense when we're thinking at the local level of different stakeholders we'd like to engage, and a familiar face or a familiar way of talking about the work or a shared language certainly strengthens, I think, the message and really the credibility of the overall coalition, right? If you've got kind of an insider who's on the coalition connecting with a particular group of stakeholders or audience members.
Absolutely.
I think that one of the key takeaways, look, I'm using the headline there, hey, one of the key takeaways is really know your audience. And so knowing who's going to be the right messenger for that, what the right message is, and how to deliver it, the channel, that media mix that Jessica said really is, be prepared and know your audience, I think would be the two big ones there. But you hit it right on the head, Elizabeth.
Well, I have a few more questions, but I should probably pause and see if other folks would like to jump in. You're welcome to unmute your line and just chat with us directly, or you could use the chat box there if you have a particular question or example or experience you'd like to share, or just a general kind of response. You're welcome to join the conversation.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you guys. Elizabeth, I just want to piggyback on something you said. If there's an experience that somebody's had on the line, either positive or negative, that they wanted to share with others, everybody's been a spokesperson, maybe not in the traditional sense of the word, but if there's something that you'd like to ask us about, either from the training or from something you've encountered, we're welcome to take those questions.
And to add to that, if anyone has an upcoming media opportunity or speaking engagement, right, and they want to run something by us, I'm happy to kind of coach you through it if helpful.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I have to just admit I've been very impressed with the communications efforts we've heard or received so far from Cohort 2, and we're only about halfway through the project, and we've got some pretty great coverage from different communities and different sites, which has been really fabulous. And one question that I think comes up when you are working at the local level, obviously we at the national level would love you to make that connection between, Plan4Health, this broader project with 35 coalitions supported by the CDC, and your particular community coalition. But sometimes it can feel, or I would imagine if I were on the ground, it could feel a little bit tricky to kind of connect all those dots. And I just wondered if you had any recommendations around, when should we think about highlighting the national effort versus when is it more appropriate to really focus on what's happening at that particular event or your coalition on the ground, or is it something people find out about when they check out your website, or what do you think when you're kind of dealing with these complex projects with all these different layers?
Sure. So one thing you'll probably hear Melissa and I say multiple times throughout this call is that it really depends on your target audience, right? So it's all about the audience. But some audiences may really care about how your community health program is contributing to a larger national health initiative like APA or CDC. This might resonate really well with public health professionals or healthcare providers. On the other hand, a local business owner or parent might not care so much about the bigger picture, right? They might care more about how your single program is going to impact them, their business, their family. So the short of it is that really looking at who you're trying to reach and whether or not it would be important for them to hear, they would be interested in hearing about APA or the larger CDC program. And Melissa, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
I actually want to pose that question to the participants today. Elizabeth just said you're doing some great work with outreach already. You're still just into it. You're there on the ground. What have you seen has worked or hasn't worked, or how are you acknowledging the national program, if at all? What have you been doing out there with your individual communication? If you're shy to speak, you can always just type it in.
That has been an advantage of Twitter. We can always see when folks are using hashtag Plan4Health. So we know they're acknowledging us that way.
Yeah. It does come down to knowing your audience, though. And maybe it's not your first message, but it's something you fold in, knowing that opportunity. If you've just got 30 seconds in the soundbite and the audience, it's not relevant to them or not as relevant, go ahead and leave that one out. But if you have a longer sit down, like a radio show or a print piece, that's a nice way to tie it all in and show that it's part of something bigger and it's not a one-off in a particular community.
Yeah, really great point.
That's helpful, and from our perspective, we of course are working with Sophie and DHPE and the American Heart Association, National WIC, and even as I kind of name our partners, sometimes it feels like I've already said too much, and so that's helpful for me to think about when to really put Plan4Health at center stage versus the Partnering for Health piece, and then this broader kind of movement conversation, how we're building on CPPW and CTG and kind of making those connections and making folks, or letting folks know that they're part of this really kind of generational change that we're working on.
And it really does go to kind of social norming ideas for those of you who are familiar with that concept, showing that other people are doing this too. It's not hard. It's not out of the ordinary. It's what engaged colleagues and community members and everybody else is doing it. It's, like you said, part of a bigger movement.
Mm-hmm. Well,
No, Elizabeth, go ahead.
Oh, I just was going to share a question that's come up on quite a few of our monthly calls at different times, and kind of thinking about word choice specifically, and certainly, I don't know, it feels like planning is special in that sense, but probably not. We've got these awkward terms like built environment, and they feel so familiar to us, and kind of remembering that we need to step away from the jargon and simplify our language. And I think we all know that on some level, even if it's hard to do. But one kind of question I think that's come up around the engagement is this, us versus them kind of space. And in your example around the smoking that you shared, Melissa, in your introduction, I think there's this kind of blaming vibe that can crop up. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about ways to maybe bridge away from that, or just kind of get back to this holistic community, we're all in this together kind of approach.
Well, I think acknowledging that might even be a concern is a great first step, Elizabeth, and other people participating today. That us versus them bit it's almost a natural default for many of us in public health. We identify a target audience and then we go, or when you're working in planning, that's who we're trying to help. But it really, the important thing is to start any discussions with a value statement that everybody can get on board with. So as the webinar mentioned, a value statement simply answers the question, what kind of world or community do we want to live in? And that answer is based on the value or values that's indisputable to audiences. Of course, we all want children to have the opportunity to be healthy kind of thing, or whatever it might be. And they're that big dream picture that you and your audience can agree on, no matter about the specifics, about the issues, the programs, or something like this. For example, it could be, we all believe that everyone deserves an equal chance to live a healthy life. Pretty hard to find someone who's not going to agree with that statement. It taps into fairness and all of that type of thing. And then you move on, you bridge, you segue into talking about how your work aligns with those values and taps into it. Also, I've seen this over the past couple of years. I've been working with the Division of Community Health for almost 6 years now, a couple of years before it was actually a division. And this came up a lot in message testing, and things to keep in mind are that who the messenger is. So if you're not part of the community that you're speaking with, whether it be a geographic community or a cultural community or whatever it is, then maybe don't say we, that type of thing. It seems forced sometimes. It's really important to be authentic and true, and that's why it's important to identify messengers who resonate and can reflect the values of whoever you're trying to reach, whoever that audience is. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be prepared and have a part or role to play in any speaking opportunity. It's just knowing what that might be. So that us versus them thing, also thinking of statements that reflect how positive improvements in the built environment, and you're right, that is a kind of a clunky, jargony word, in our community spaces and our places to play and work, how improvements there benefit everybody. So it's not just this one community or this one segment of the population. It helps us all. So that kind of encompassing language about that keeps away from either stigmatizing or signaling out communities who may be more in need gets more people on board too, and it's just that kind of sense of unity. But did that answer, Elizabeth? I felt that was a little rambly, but you get me excited on a topic that I like to talk about. I'm like, yes, that's a good question.
No, that was fabulous. That was really helpful. And I think you're right about having a sense of making sure that we're reflecting on who we are and where we are, so that it is a either genuine sense of connection or acknowledgement that this is maybe not my community, but I'm here to support the work that's already happening in this community, or that kind of thing. I think that's great. And when you say it like that, Melissa, it's so clear. Of course, we would start with a value statement, and of course, everyone can get behind healthy communities, and we all want this. And then moving from that kind of shared value to what are we doing to advance our particular program, or how are we moving toward that value? That's
I'll say
to do that when the spotlight is on us.
Well, that's why practicing comes in. Be prepared. One of those 4 B's. Practicing your key messages, kind of having them at the fingertips. I will say that often, and you'll have to know your audience and figure this out yourself, but often something we've seen across the country and in many populations, that children and families are often a shared value, like making places better for children, or helping their future, or better for families. Now, how that gets defined is very different across the country in different populations, but that's a starting off point for a lot of times. So that if you're stuck for like, ooh, what do we all have in common? Wanting a better future for our children and families tends to be a starting point.
Great, that's helpful. And I know Jessica and I were chatting the other day about communications in general, and kind of the move toward the phrase that we hear from the CDC, but also from other funders, and kind of the culture of health, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation move, making healthy choices easier, or making the healthy choice the easy choice, where we live, learn, work, and play. And I like how that gives us a place without, of course, that jargon of the built environment kind of language.
I was using it earlier today, actually, with somebody trying to explain what community health means. But if you don't mind, Elizabeth and Jessica, I'd just like to go back out to participants one more time. We know you're there. But in terms of audiences and value statements, what audiences are you guys trying to reach, or are you reaching, or would you like to reach? What are you looking through there, considering there? Does anyone want to be brave enough and chat something in as an audience you might be trying to reach? Or you can speak. Okay. Oh, Karen, thank you. See, it's just that easy, guys. Decision makers, yes, they're a very important part. Yeah, and they have you have to be very. They have their own way of listening to information, hearing information, and often decision makers are keyed into the values of their community too. So that's an important one. Anybody else? Other audiences you're trying to reach through your work?
I'll throw out there, Jessica here. So, there's typically a different way to talk to the public versus partners, and so keeping in mind that your public communication, and again, general public is a little too broad, but people within a community might be a different message than partners who really understand the work that you're doing and may already be involved in the work you're doing. And I see, Karen, people with disabilities, that's another great specific audience.
Yes, and one that you probably would want to either check messages with or find a partner who's familiar with that, because that is a community where they are often overlooked when it comes to communication outreach in a number of ways. So making sure that gets done right, that's a fantastic and very specific audience to focus on when it comes to some of these topics. Thank you. Keisa, we see you typing it. Thank you. Lower income families, okay. I don't want to put you on the spot because I do want to encourage people to type, but Keisa, are there shared values or communication channels that you've been using or plan to use that work with those families? You can speak or type, or just punt on the question, but.
While we're, oh, go ahead.
Well, I just was going to mention in a call earlier today, we were chatting with a coalition who's working in rural Kentucky, and they were sharing, when you were just saying how are you connecting with these particular audiences, they were talking about texting as being a way to get resources out and recognizing that in some of the communities, internet access is just not there, and folks are not going to the website or kind of the usual social media, but using text messages, which I thought was great. And I hadn't really thought about that in terms of a communication strategy necessarily, but I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And for Karen and Keisa especially, I think that question that Elizabeth asked earlier about trying to avoid that us versus them language is going to be especially key with those two populations because it so often has been done like that in the past, that really, embracing the shared values and positive forward-looking statements are going to go a long way there. You're trying to figure out how to create something. Oh, that's fantastic. Audience research is always valuable. And focus groups are a strong way to do it. If your budget is limited or there are other things, you can talk to Elizabeth or Jessica about other ways to do that, but there's also, working through partners or just intercepts, if you're somewhere where those audiences are. But that is bottom line for knowing your audience is actually speak to them, share some materials, hear what's going on with them. Because sometimes the barriers might not be the ones that we necessarily think of first as, planners or public health professionals. We might think it's something else, and it's like, oh, no, actually, it's some other root cause that's causing them to avoid behaviors.
Okay. And I'll add, Jessica here, so you touched on a really good point, Melissa, testing, right, your messages and your materials before distributing. And I think there's kind of a distinction between the two because messages, of course, it's content, it's word choice. Does it resonate? Is it in plain language? But also materials. So, for example, an awardee that I work with, they were launching a smoke-free multi-unit housing campaign, and they tested a variety of images with community members, and an image of a young girl having breathing difficulties actually resonated best with their target audience, and it was an image that just I personally wouldn't have chosen, and so gathering that information on the front end is very helpful and will help you be successful. And then in terms of word choices, I know the online training went through some of the DCH research, but words like changing, transforming, fixing, well, to us, they may seem just fine. They can come across as kind of diminishing the positive work that's already been done in a community, and so other word choices are building, strengthening, enhancing, so acknowledging that work has been done and that you and your programs are bolstering that, if that makes sense. But thank you, Keisa and Karen, for sharing your audiences with us.
And I know that when Jessica provided us with a training not too long ago about infographics too, and just hearing you describe the image and kind of this audience testing and thinking about ways to convey information and that that are accessible and easy to digest, and so part of it seems to be about, of course, our messaging and what we're doing in our value statement, and then sometimes we also have to kind of make the case for the need itself. And I just wondered if you have found, is it an infographic and facts and statistics that tends to be effective, or do people prefer more of that personal story about the young woman you were just describing having a difficult time breathing? Is that kind of where maybe that kind of pulls at the heartstrings in a different way, or do you have any recommendations around kind of demonstrating the need or making the case?
Sure. I mean, I can start, and Melissa, feel free to jump in. But again, it does depend on your stakeholder. It does depend on your audience, and so if you're communicating with a group of scientists or public health professionals or healthcare providers, et cetera. The statistics and the facts and the figures might resonate with them, and so an infographic that really called out, social math numbers might really connect with them, whereas if you're trying to reach community members or parents or moms, a story sometimes has more of an impact than facts and figures. So I think it does depend on who you're trying to reach, but acknowledging how they like to receive their information and then testing information with them is always very helpful. Melissa, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
I would say that there are very few instances where a personal story or a description of the problem and solution, real life one, if possible, doesn't go along. That was a double negative. Let me try that again. Personal stories are always better to strengthen. So even if you, in addition to the research and the numbers, even with scientific audiences, if you can put in an anecdote or something that plays both sides of it, Elizabeth and others, that goes a long way. There are very few instances where I wouldn't include a personal story if I had one, or an example. Ideally, they'd be real and from the community, but even if it paints a picture of what you're trying to get, or imagine this, I have been in numerous focus groups where, regardless of the audience, that was kind of what they took away with. Even the people understood the numbers and were strong with numeracy skills and that kind of thing, or appreciated or said they appreciated numbers and that kind of thing, they had that kind of image and story in their head too to tie it back to, and it really reinforced what they heard from the data and statistics. So I think if you have one or two really strong stories that illustrate the important work that's being done, the need for it, ideally the solutions really just kind of here's what we are doing or here's what we hope to be doing, I would always try to include something like that. It goes such a long way.
Well, and you used the phrase social math, Jessica, and I wondered if you could unpack that a little bit. I was so excited to learn about this, and I don't know if all the folks on the line had a chance to sit in on the infographic webinar, but it's such a cool concept, and I think it really helped me get away from the idea of just numbers for the sake of numbers and start to kind of translate these concepts into, you still have those numbers, but they're a little bit more meaningful in our daily lives.
Absolutely. So, we could have a whole conversation on social math, but in brief, it's the practice of making, large, scary numbers comprehensible and compelling by, comparing them or placing them in a social context, right, that provides meaning. So, for example, if we're talking about, I'm just thinking of what's been in the news lately, food waste. We might not know what a ton of food waste looks like, but if we said, and I'm totally making this up, that if you lined up all the food side by side, it would stretch for 3 miles. That was a ton of food waste. It gives people really the context to be able to better comprehend the numbers that you're throwing at them. Another good rule of thumb around social math is that percentages can be difficult for people to understand. While we think we understand percentages, many of us, myself included, maybe don't have as good of a grasp on them as we think we do, and it's also hard to, kind of put them in context. What does 5% look like?
That's a great point. I only associate percentages kind of with grades, which isn't terribly helpful when you're, thinking about these social challenges.
Elizabeth, I would also say that social math, or if you use a number or statistic, that giving some context to it, and that's what social math really does too. So if we say, the obesity rate in this county is X percent, if that's just out there, say it's 60% or whatever it is. Again, like Jessica, I'm kind of making these up, but your audience might be left wondering, is that good? Is that bad? Even if you compare it to the national, so things like that in the abstract, as much as you can make it very clear and concrete to people and kind of tell them how that fits into things, it often makes the message that you're delivering more digestible.
That makes sense, and we actually we were hosting a webinar yesterday on wayfinding, and the presenter went through lots of very interesting and visual ways to communicate with folks who are coming to a park, and she was talking about signs and really translating signs from miles to minutes. So it's only a 5-minute walk to the concession stand versus half a mile, and how that kind of shift empowered people to realize, oh, I can walk over there.
There you go. If you've ever traveled through the Atlanta Hartsfield Airport, they'll tell you it's like a 10-minute walk between terminals or something like that when people are trying to decide whether to take the train or to walk from terminal to terminal. And the minutes, just for me personally, work a lot better than it's half a mile kind of thing.
Right.
Justin, Elizabeth, Hannah's asking for more information on social math. I bet you we do have some resources we can share.
We do.
Definitely.
So remind me, Elizabeth, where the infographic webinar sits, because a good chunk of that did cover social math.
Yes, I can chat the link out. It should be in our archived webinar page. 1 second, let me double check. And there's also a second webinar that we didn't play, or we didn't present this time around, but it was from the CDC maybe in the fall of 2014 or 2015, and it really did dive into hearts and minds and activating folks through social math. So I can chat that link as well. All right, so this is the infographic webinar with the social math. And let me just find the...
Hannah, I know that you're typing, but I hope you can listen too. You said you've done this wayfinding signage in Tacoma because people have different speeds and abilities and that type of thing. Is that something that you thought of on your own, or did you learn that from a focus group, or are there other ways that you're testing that kind of stuff? I see you're typing. Thank you.
I have to say and maybe I'll chat the wayfinding webinar too. It was really interesting yesterday to think about. I'm not very familiar with wayfinding. Of course, Karen is working on that as part of her Plan4Health project. And some of the examples, the images that Katie shared yesterday were really this fantastic way of kind of thinking about space and just communicating in a totally almost a different level, kind of signs all around buildings and these really graphic images, which was just kind of fun to see and to think about.
Oh. And while we're waiting, I'm happy to share another example or two of social math if that would be helpful. So another one is, like, for example, like in the U.S., food typically travels like 1,500 miles from farm to plate, the distance between Phoenix and Chicago. So we might not know what 1,500 miles looks like, but when we put in that context the distance between Phoenix and Chicago, all of a sudden we're like, oh my gosh, that's a long way. And another example is, so the tobacco industry spends more money promoting smoking in a week than the federal government spends on preventing smoking in a year. So this example really ties it into time, right? Week versus year. In the example I just shared, it's more about distance, so miles versus the distance between Phoenix and Chicago. So those are just two ways, time and place or distance, that you can break down your numbers to provide that context that might resonate better with people.
That's helpful. Thank you.
We've talked about personal stories. We've talked about social math. Are there other ways people are out there getting their stories out? Are they found effective with the audiences they're working with? Oh, and Elizabeth, you had shared about the social media and the to Twitter outreach and stuff. There's so many ways to reach our audiences, and messages, you can have your key messages, but knowing what works appropriately for what channels, beyond just like character space and length, what information are people ready to receive, on their mobile device, or what do they want to hear through their paper or their radio show? Those are all things to keep in mind, and that's something you'll know if you really kind of dig into your audiences more.
Mm-hmm. Recently, we launched a Plan4Health blog in June of 2015, so it's been about a year, and that's been a good experience for us to get better at telling kind of concise stories and anecdotes, or not anecdotes, I guess, but very specific experiences in just a few paragraphs. And I think it's helped us start to organize the information in a way that's a little bit more user-friendly, and it's also helped me realize or acknowledge or maybe appreciate in a whole new level the amount of work that communications staff members are tackling. And just a couple of blog posts a week, it doesn't seem like so much when you're making the plan, but it can be a little tricky. And so we've tried to really keep our eyes open for like-minded organizations and cross-post whenever we can, or start to not just push our message out, but also be as interactive as possible and acknowledging that, there are other folks working on similar things. And it's been a great way to ease our writing burden, but also I think can help expand the community and the conversation a little bit.
That's great. And, if you're putting this effort into blog posts, which is awesome to hear, you can, talking again about that media mix, you can pull sentences out and turn them into social media messages. You can pull out a small paragraph and add it into a newsletter to partners, for example. So, while it is a lot of effort, and it truly is, keeping up with the blog and finding content that can engage your audience, week after week, the good of that is that you can kind of repurpose, repackage that content in a variety of ways and share it through a variety of channels, as Melissa mentioned earlier, to amplify. So, you're kind of killing, I hate this expression, but like killing like two birds with one stone. There's got to be another more positive expression. But
releasing two birds.
Yes, releasing two birds in one cage, from one cage.
And I loved hearing the word plan, not just because of who we're talking with today, but if you do have a kind of an idea, and of course being flexible is important, but if you're doing 2 blog posts a week, they don't need to surprise you each week. They're coming. So thinking through what might, there are some health observance hooks or seasonal hooks, or maybe you have events that are coming out, like, hey, we're going to have 2 blogs about that. And then, like Jessica said, repurposing what you do, because a lot of work goes into developing communication materials. Think of other ways you can share them and repurpose them and get more mileage out of them. So really, really glad to hear that's happening.
Maybe you want to have a guest blogger, right? So you can invite a partner to contribute to your blog, which is a way to kind of strengthen a relationship with your partner, but it also kind of takes the load off of you a little bit, because we recognize that at the community coalition level, you all are wearing multiple hats, and so it truly is hard to, take care of the communications work and the program work and everything else. And so if partners can help you, it's a great way to build relationships not only for your programs, but, looking in the future. I mean, partners can help sustain your work over time, perhaps, and, help perhaps sustain communication work over time. You never know.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. And I have to confess that last summer we had a wonderful intern who had her own blog and was also really helpful in getting us started and just being a little bit more in the know, I think, around blog creation. And interns are also a wonderful resource for some of that social media type of things. But I really like your point about giving partners opportunities to participate in a way that will benefit them as well as benefit you. And again, we get back to the complementary, consistent messaging piece. One of the more recent activities we've been tackling at the national level has been thinking about videos, and one of the coalitions in our first cohort, the St. Louis Coalition, put together this fabulous video that we've shared a million times about traffic calming, and Grace actually went through her process. A couple of months ago, she shared a little bit about how they found the right videographer and then how they kind of made the edits and went through that experience. And it was really interesting to hear about and kind of a different way to maybe, showcase the work of the coalition. And at the national level, we're hoping to, we have a couple of videos we're working on as well. And it's again, really been eye-opening for me to think about, telling the story in 3 minutes, which of course is what we're doing as spokespeople as well, but having it kind of a different medium with music and pictures and images that you're trying to balance. So it's been another learning opportunity, but I do think video, those short, just 2 or 3 minutes, and I know the CDC has some really fabulous videos as well. That's another, seems to be a great way to get your message across.
And Elizabeth, I would add that this is beyond my expertise. I'm a little older than the people who do social media in our office, but we've been taking those videos and making little gifts out of them and stuff too. So they have,
yeah.
So just like repurposing a blog into a tweet or something, we've been repurposing some of our larger videos into shorter videos, and some of those shorter videos even into little gifts for our social media outreach. So there's a lot. Always think of ways you can be reusing your communication products because, like you said, a lot of time went into them, and there are other ways to use them. So that was kind of that was new for me to see. I was like, oh wow, okay. So,
yeah, that's great. I hadn't thought of that.
Mm-hmm. Are there any questions from the participants? Oh, Hannah. Hey, there you are. Or things that you've experienced, things that you're working on, you just want to share because you're proud or excited about it? Thank you for the compliment on the videos. We're very proud of them too, and it's hard work to try and tell a story in just a couple of minutes. So I'm glad they're useful to you, and then that you're getting use out of them.
And there are more videos on the Division of Community Health's website. And so if you go to www.cdc.gov/communityhealth, and I can type it in to the chat box, they're under, okay, great. They're under, is it resources or multimedia, Melissa?
It's under multimedia.
Multimedia, yep. There's a whole bunch of videos on making the case. There we go.
Yep, making the business case. There's a series of 14 videos, so hopefully you can find some utility out of those as well.
Yeah, they're fantastic. I really like that series, and it's been really helpful for us to share those as well. And I will make a plug for we do have a few Plan4Health videos that we've received from coalitions. So the Bensonville, Illinois Coalition, they put together 2 PSAs around active transportation and complete streets, and 2 versions, one in English, one in Spanish, that turned out really, really well. And then we do have quite a few interviews, which are not as exciting, but the coalition members talking about their experiences and their projects. And then hopefully more to come as we continue to work on our video skills here.
Yeah. And videos come in lots of different forms, and while they might, I think some talking head videos, depending on the audience, are a good idea, Elizabeth. We've done that at meetings and stuff before, too. So there's the ones that Hannah and others have referenced. We've also got some of people talking about their experiences. There's also, if budget's a concern or just to mix it up a bit, you can do animated videos or screenshots with imagery, that kind of thing, kind of like a really like a presentation type of thing, but with music or something. There are some lower cost ideas for making videos if that's something anybody's interested in. They don't need to be full on-site productions necessarily. There's a large, it's very scalable. Videos are very scalable.
That's good to know. The days of special fancy cameras, I guess, are kind of behind us. And actually those photos are on the screen are from the St. Louis Coalition, and a lot of the photos Grace took just with her iPhone, and they really captured kind of the experience of their colorful pop-up demonstrations, so that's been a great resource for them.
Something to keep in mind with videos is buying out the creative ahead of time or at the very beginning to ensure that you'd be able to use the videos in the future. And so I know DCH has the advertising and media checklist, and I'm not sure if that's something that has been shared with subrecipients before, but that might be a helpful tool. So
That would be great. I don't think we've shared that.
And I'm going to make a shameless plug for another website and resource available to all of you, the Community Health Media Center, sometimes called the CHMC. That's a repository of all kinds of videos and ads and materials from federal, local, community, all kinds of organizations. They put them there. They have research attached to them, so you can see how they tested with certain audiences and that type of thing. So if you're looking for inspiration and or something, many of them are there for the public to use. So if you just want to tailor them for what you've got, the CHMC also is a resource available. And for the videos that you guys are doing, they are always looking for more content and to grow that repository. So I know that there's another place where the work that you're doing can benefit not only your organization and your communities, but even a greater sphere of influence there by sharing them with others. So
great, that's good to keep in mind. Alrighty. Well, I have to say I have thoroughly enjoyed chatting with you both. This has been really wonderful, and thank you for those of you who are on the line and who shared your experiences and stories. And I've just learned so much through the CDC and through our colleagues at APA and APHA and all of you on the ground about communications. It's been a whirlwind, but I definitely feel that I've grown. So if other folks have any final questions or any closing thoughts, we're getting pretty close to the 4 o'clock hour. Well,
Elizabeth, I know we might be seeing some people in Sacramento, but if others on this call have questions that occur to them later, or maybe they were just a little too shy to ask today, is there some place that they can go or ask that afterwards?
Oh, sure. You are always welcome to email me, of course, and I can connect you with Melissa and Jessica. And that's right. That's a good reminder. So we will see you face to face in Sacramento in just a couple of weeks. If you're headed to that regional meeting, if you attended the Baltimore regional meeting, or if you're not attending either meeting, just let me know, and we of course will coordinate around the monthly calls for a face-to-face, virtual face-to-face conversation and some feedback, which is really great. And thank you for offering that resource. I think. Just going through the course and kind of reflecting on my own messaging, I'm realizing how beneficial it's going to be to really sit down with you all and practice and get some live feedback.
It should be fun. Thank you so much for having us. This has been a great conversation, and we will continue it.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you both so much, and see you soon.
You're welcome. Take care.
Thanks.